You're listening to The Pain Chaser 1, Ambuscade. This audiobook contains violence, torture, drug use, and scenes of a graphic and often disturbing sexual nature. It should go without saying that it is not intended for children. Now turn up the sound, turn down the lights, and find a comfortable place to hide. Because fear has a face, and I'm going to show it to you. Chapter 5. Thursday came before any of them knew it, and the 5 inspectors bound for Kettle Creek High School spent most of the morning doing paperwork in the office. As predicted, Chase Lawrence's construction crew was still on site until well after 3 o'clock in the afternoon. When the inspectors finally left Chester for Kettle Creek, it was under an ominous gray sky. But at least it was a comfortable trip. There was more than enough room in the SUV. As soon as they passed the city limits, a strange hush fell over the world. Rob turned from where he sat sandwiched in the back between Anton and Annie, pressing his face against the back window. "Weird," he said. "What is?" Annie asked. "I don't know," he told her honestly. "Something just doesn't feel right." "I'll tell you what it is," Steve said without turning. "There's no one here. There hasn't been a single car on the road since we got into town." "Yeah," Rob said. "I guess that's what it is." Annie looked out the window at the traffic lights, switching from red to green and back again. It hardly seemed to matter. A blind crossing guard giving signals to no one. Anton hummed tonelessly. "Do you have any idea where we're going, Steve?" "More or less," Steve admitted. "The GPS maps of the area are shoddy, but I think I can figure it out." "This place is as creepy as my husband said it was," Annie was saying. "I knew it had a grisly history, but he never mentioned anything about how desolate the place was." "No one wants to live in a town awash in this much blood," Anton said with the playful tone of a horror movie narrator. Steve groaned from the front seat. "What the hell happened to this place?" she asked. "A fire," Steve answered sharply. "It was a hell of a lot more than just a fire," Anton said defensively. "A fire doesn't drive every living person out of town." Steve shook his head. "Fine, Anton. Explain it to her. But leave out the whistles and bells." "Aw, what fun is it going into a place like Kettle Creek if you're not going to do the thing right?" "We're not here to have fun. We're here to work." "Fine," Anton said, but his boyish smile betrayed his words. The story he told her was familiar to Rob, and he felt himself becoming uncomfortable again. Thankfully, he glazed over the details of the 2 bodies found in the tunnels. Not many people left who really remember the town. It has an eerie way of keeping people away, he was saying. "It's not eerie," Steve said. "It's superstition. People scare easy. That's all there is to it." "Okay, then what about the multiple disappearances and violent crimes?" "You yourself don't seem to know too much about them," Steve grunted. "Newspapers do the same thing you are. They try to get a rise out of people. That's how they make their living." Anton crossed his arms, obviously unwilling to give up his fantasy that Kettle Creek was haunted. But Steve's insistence made Rob feel a little better. "A fire would have been enough for me," Annie said. "What do you mean?" Rob asked her. "I don't like fire. My folks were killed in a fire." "Is that why you got into this line of work?" She nodded, but didn't say anything. The car fell silent. Finally, after a long moment, Anton said, "Sorry, Annie." He let his hands fall to his sides. The empty streets seemed to swallow sound. The skeleton of a once living thing, feared and forgotten. The gray sky above mirrored the emptiness, pierced only by the faint, round glow that marked the sun's position. But its light could barely force its way through the dense clouds. Annie wondered how often the sun touched this decomposing place. The whole landscape seemed a photograph, expressed in sepia tones, lifeless and ancient. From above, huge lazy flakes of snow began to float down, blanketing the streets and lawns in a matter of minutes. The landscape changed instantly from a dirty yellow to an all-consuming white. "Oh, fuck," Tabby said, breaking her silence. "Here comes the snow." Half an hour of silence followed, in which everyone was thoroughly convinced that Steve had gotten them lost, until he finally announced, "We're here." They piled out of the SUV into the darkening embrace of the claustrophobic storm. The wind had started to blow forcefully, accompanied by the drone of a low whistle that seemed to come from all around them. The school stood before them, a vague shape in the decreasing visibility, somehow less imposing than their shared stories had made it seem. It was only a building, after all. At the front door, a man-shaped figure motioned to them, beckoning them to come inside. As they approached, Annie saw that it was Chase Lawrence, the well-muscled foreman of the restoration team. Piercing blue eyes stared out from a tanned and weather-worn but handsome face. A black skull cap covered all but a few stray strands of his sandy blonde hair. He greeted the inspectors at the door with firm handshakes and a charming smile. "We were beginning to think you weren't going to make it." "Great. Can we go home now?" one of his men was saying. He turned on the man. "Christ, Dimitri, give the folks a moment to get settled in, will you?" The man made a nondescript noise with his lips and walked off. "You'll have to excuse my crew. It's been a long week, and we're all looking forward to getting home before the snow gets any worse." "I'll bet you want to get away from this old haunted tomb and never look back, huh?" Anton asked him. Chase gave him a long, incredulous look, before finally snorting with laughter. "You're serious, aren't you?" "He's fishing for interesting campfire stories," Steve said colorlessly. Chase shrugged. "Sorry, man. Scariest thing I've seen around here are the Union guys." Annie giggled, and Chase allowed his hypnotic eyes to finally take notice of her. She felt her heart flutter at his glance, and reminded herself that she was happily married. "Hello, Annie," he said, allowing his wide grin another inch of growth. "How have you been?" "I'm okay," she said. Tabby laid her hand on Annie's shoulder with a chuckle as she walked past into the hall beyond. Chase did not seem to notice. "There's coffee in the main office if you want to get warmed up." He seemed to be talking to Annie directly, but the others pushed past regardless. For a moment, the two stood alone in the entryway, just smiling at one another, before Chase motioned with his head and turned on his heel. Annie followed obediently, feeling a tingle of guilt at her oogling of Chase Lawrence. Chase ushered them into a wide room that would serve as a main office for the new construction. As it was, there was no furniture in the room, only a simple wooden barrier and an open area that would soon be filled with cubicles. A Mr. Coffee sat on the floor in the corner, plugged into a faceless outlet, encircled by a handful of styrofoam cups and sugar packets swiped from one local diner or other. "Help yourselves," Chase said to them, pointing at the coffee. "I just made a fresh pot, so it shouldn't be too bad. I just need to get my guys packed up, and we'll be out of your hair in a second." Without a further word, and an almost unnoticeable glance in Annie's direction, he disappeared back through the door. "Somebody's got a crush," Tabby said with a piggy grin and forced laugh. "Jealous?" Rob asked her. "Hell no," Tabby said, hands on her hips. "What would I have to be jealous about?" "I don't know. Chase is an awfully pretty man," he said, sharing a boyish chuckle with Anton. "I got a little weak in the knees myself." Annie made an effort to ignore the others, busying herself with a close inspection of the nearest wall. "Shut up, Rob," Tabby told him. "Then don't pick on Annie," Rob retorted. "She hasn't said shit all night." "Why so defensive over her, Rob? You got a crush too?" Rob chuckled. "Now I know you're jealous." He grabbed his crotch and thrust his hips at her. "You looking for someone to tame the cougar?" Both of you, shut up, Steve said, but he was looking out the window.